China laid claim to some 50,000 square miles of Indian territory in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh. That led the stage for a bloody conflict to follow in 1962. Hello, welcome to Walker Talks. Today we'll talk about the legitimacy of Chinese claim on Indian territories and Tibet. And hey, if you're wondering, why the heck is Walker talking about Tibet? Because it is north of the wall, quite literally. A year before that, it was China who revealed the construction of the Karakoram Highway. This was the setting for the 1962 Indo-Sino conflict. July 1962, 300 Chinese soldiers surrounded Indian post at Galwan, occupied by 40 Gurkha soldiers. This was one of the skirmishes between India and Chinese forces, leading to hostilities at Namkachu on 20th October 1962. Half-truth on reality, preparedness and force imbalance led to a disastrous war for India. Fast forward 60 years and the Galwan Valley has again become a flashpoint. In today's discussion, we will not focus on the 1962 war, rather on the events before the war and the legitimacy of the Chinese claim on Tibetan territory and on parts of Indian territory. There are some unexpected players in this whole story. Russia, China, Mongolia, Tibet, British India, and lo and behold, United States. Now Tibet had been independent for long periods up till the 18th century. It was in 1720 when the Chinese forces first invaded Tibet to forestall a suspected Tibetan-Mongol alliance. So that's the beginning of the story. China was able to establish a foothold in Tibet and had control, weakening and strengthening for next 100 odd years. It was in 1904 when the British intervened to stop a likely collision between Dalai Lama and the Russian agents. Now keep in mind, the Tsarist Russia was the boogeyman of the 20th century. With the Britishers coming in, Tibet had little say. The young Dalai Lama had to agree with the Anglo-Tibetan Treaty, which gave the British trading controls and also concessions to foreign powers. They had direct influence over foreign policy of Tibet. The British were able to secure an Anglo-Chinese Treaty in 1906. There was a thinly disguised arrangement to create and maintain a buffer zone to protect the northern borders of British India. Initially, the British government wanted to give Tibet international recognition as a sovereign state, but the House ended up giving Chinese a suzerainty control over Tibet, which is the root cause of this problem. Now the Chinese didn't want to sit idle, and the Chinese government tried to recapture Tibet in the early 1900s. In 1910, the Chinese invaded Tibet, forcing Dalai Lama to flee to India. And then the British government intervened and knocked on China's head and said, hey, you're violating the Anglo-Chinese Treaty of 1906. Britishers, being as smart as they were in policy, then went on to create inner and outer Tibet, were then instructed not to interfere in any matters outer Tibet and relocate Chinese establishments out of Tibet. This exercise, the Britishers smartly also drew the boundary between India, Tibet, from Bhutan eastwards to Burma. This boundary later came to known as the McMahon Line. Chinese played a trump card there and later walked out of the treaty, stating they did not agree with the border drawn for outer and inner Tibet. Later, in 1914, the British government signed a declaration directly with the Tibet government, later known as the 1914 Shimla Convention. The British government also threatened China that they will declare Tibet as a sovereign state unless China was to provide a quid pro quo and admit the autonomy of Tibet and also agree to fixing a frontier. That quid pro quo was never given by the Chinese. Needless to say, Chinese did not ratify the Shimla Agreement, and they also backed away from accepting the border drawn by McMahon. Now, Mr. McMahon, in all his brilliance, used a thick nib pen on a quarter-inch map to draw the border along the watershed, and the thick line drawn on a quarter-inch map now represents more than hundreds of meters of no man's land between the bordering countries, which continue to be a flashpoint So that establishes China's claim on Tibet, or at least in their mind. They were given the suzerainty control over Tibet. So when the British left the subcontinent, in Chinese mind, Tibet belonged to China, and they continued to dominate and occupy everything Tibet. And that brings us to Chinese claim on Indian territory. Now we come to the legal argument. China's claim of Tibetan territories is based on their conquest of the Tibetan plateau or parts of it in the 17th and 18th centuries, whereas India is the legal heir of everything British India. After independence, India had an opportunity to challenge the status quo, but India adopted the policy of appeasement and surrendered to China. India went out of its way to defend China's annexation and found historical justification on China's claim over Tibet. India even went as far as to oppose discussion of Tibet's appeal for independence in the United Nations. In effect, India cut the tree they were sitting on. Now, if China can claim territories of foreign nations based on their conquest of 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, by that measure, India should assert control over Afghanistan, Cambodia, most of Southeast Asia, but that's not how the modern world works. Don't forget to check out part 2 of this series, where we'll get into the nitty-gritties of the disputed territories between China and India in Akshai Chin and Nepal. See you there.